How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the billyGOAT channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about some life updates, what's been going on with me as far as my artwork, and I'll be showing you some art that I worked on last year. I haven't really been doing much art this year, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about. But I'm also going to be introducing a new segment called the billyGOAT Book Club, which is pretty much what it sounds like. I'm going to be reviewing the 5 books that I read in 2024, and I also kind of want this to be an ongoing series of videos. So as I read more books, I'll put out more of these book club videos. But anyway, that's enough introduction. Let's go ahead and get into the video. Alright, so before I get into what I've been up to the last couple of months, I want to give you some background on this piece of art that I'm working on here. For about a year now, I've been trying to get more involved in my local art community, and I've been doing a couple different things, but one thing that caught my eye, this was probably like late August of 2024. I was scrolling on either Facebook or Instagram, and I came across this ad for a juried art show called the Best of Polk Show. This was an art show specifically for artists in my county, Polk County. You could submit up to 3 pieces of art, and if the judge liked your art, you got accepted into the show, and your art got displayed in a museum, and you'd get like a cash prize. So I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty nice. There was a $35 application fee, but I figured it was worth it just to, possibly have the chance to be accepted. It's kind of hard to tell when you enter something like this exactly what your competition's going to be, so to speak. Like what level are these other artists going to be at, or I just didn't really know what my odds were, especially when you have one judge. It's like a lot of it's just going to depend on what their taste in art is and what they find to be good and all that. So I already had 3 paintings that I could have submitted, but I wanted to do at least one new piece of art specifically for this show. So I tried to brainstorm something that was completely original, but in the end I just decided to do a remake of an old sketchbook drawing called Squiggle City. It seemed like the safer move since I didn't have as much time as I would have liked. I basically had a month until the deadline, which was at the end of September. So I decided to go with this kind of remake of my sketchbook drawing, and I decided to call it appropriately New Squiggle City. The first step in this process was to scale up the original drawing to fit onto a 24 by 30 canvas. So basically I just drew a rough diagram on graph paper and tried to get everything looking good in the new, more square format. So I'm just going to let this footage speak for itself for a little while I talk about what I've been up to lately, how I've been feeling creatively, and I've kind of been stuck in a little bit of a rut. And then I'll talk about what my quote-unquote social media strategy will be moving forward. So first of all, a couple new things that have been going on with me. In February, I got a promotion at work. This job that I've been working at Owens Corning, which is a fiberglass company, I'm what they call a downline operator, and I was already pretty happy with my position. I've been making the most that I've ever made at a job, which is good, and I like the hours, I like the schedule and all that. But one of the downline leads got fired, and that created an opening, and they pretty much, management just came to me and offered me the job because I've been there longer than any of the other people. So I accepted the position. I had to do an interview for it and everything, and so I got a pretty big raise, like surprisingly big. considering that basically I'm just doing the same job. I just have to make decisions whenever certain situations come up. And so as far as my work goes, I'm feeling pretty good about that. One big thing that happened, this was a couple of weeks ago now. I got home from work, and when I was at work, I thought my blood sugar was going low, so I had like 7 or 8 gummy worms. I always keep some kind of candy at my workstation just in case my blood goes low. So I ate some gummy worms, then I got off work, I drove home, and I was so tired from work that I just crawled into bed and didn't really like check my blood or anything like that like I should have done. So at about 1 in the afternoon, I had a seizure, and my wife, luckily she was home because my son was sick, so she was kind of watching him, and she notices me thrashing around in bed, and she called 911, and the paramedics came and got me and took me away in the ambulance. Next thing I know, I'm waking up, getting wheeled into the hospital, and that's always a fun experience. So they took me in, they did some tests. I want to say they did an x-ray, they did a CAT scan. They wanted to do an MRI too, because when the paramedics got to my house and they did a blood sugar check on me, my blood sugar was like 105 or something like that. Like, it wasn't actually that low. Like 105 is considered a normal blood sugar. So they were thinking that I had a seizure for some other reason other than my blood sugar, and I was just really skeptical of that the whole time. You know, they're telling me, oh, we need you to talk to this neurologist, we need to do an MRI, we need to run all these different neurological tests. And I'm just like, no, it was my blood sugar. Like, I remember going to bed and thinking, oh, I should probably check my blood. Like, I might go low. But I was figuring if I did go low, I'll just wake up. Because that does happen a lot. I'll go low like in the middle of the night, and I'll just wake up and immediately feel that I'm low, and I'll go get some juice or a snack or whatever. But this time, I guess because I was so tired, it didn't happen. But I was still pretty convinced that it was just a hypoglycemic episode and not anything else. So I stayed Wednesday night into Thursday. And then by Thursday afternoon, I was just laying in there, you know, hooked up to all this shit, hooked up to the IV. And I was like, I gotta get out of here. And so I checked myself out, and that was that. But, you know, it's always kind of a scary experience, and once again kind of reinforces that I need to try to stay on top of this and not just assume, oh, I don't need to check my blood, I can just deal with it later, because sometimes it doesn't work out that way. One more thing I want to mention is, over spring break, I was able to take a vacation with my wife and kids, and we haven't been able to take an out-of-state vacation since about 2021, when we went to Colorado. And actually, I have some videos on my channel from that trip. So this was a pretty big deal. We decided to go to the Florida Cavern State Park, which is in the panhandle of Florida. We rented a car because I don't trust my car to drive up mountains and shit. So we drove up there, we did a cave tour, and it was pretty cool. They don't really want you to touch anything in the cave, so you can't like touch the stalactites and stalagmites and all that stuff. Obviously there'd be people trying to break them off and take them home, probably, I don't know. But we did the tour, which was very interesting, and we walked a couple trails in that park. And then after that, we drove up to Tennessee, to Chattanooga, which is a spot that we've visited before. For this trip, we stayed for a couple of days, for about 3 days, because I wanted us to have enough time to, explore. It always sucks on a vacation when you're feeling rushed and you're just jumping from here to there and everything. So we got a hotel in the same area that we got last time, which was near Lookout Mountain. If you've never been there, Lookout Mountain is just this big mountain that like straddles the border of Tennessee and Georgia, and you can drive up to the top and look out over the whole Chattanooga area. It's like an amazing view. Very cold. We visited this other state park called the Savage Gulf Natural Area, and we saw some amazing waterfalls. We hiked to this rock formation called the Stone Door, which is like a big staircase. It's like cut into the rock. You go down the staircase and then you can continue on the trail. And there's these overlooks that are like basically cliffs that you can just walk out onto the rock and just look out over the valley. So it was really nice. Anytime I go anywhere with any kind of elevation difference, it's like, whoa, because living in Florida is just flat swamps pretty much. So yeah, overall it was a great trip. We did a little shopping on the last day. We went to this area in Chattanooga called the North Shore and walked along the street there where they had a lot of art galleries and cool shops. There was this one store called I Go Tokyo that was like Japanese merchandise. They had books about how to cook ramen and, the cute little stuffed animals and Hello Kitty and all that kind of stuff. They even had an art supply area in the back of the store, and I was like, hell yeah. And they had all these kind of pens, watercolor sets that you don't normally see if you go to like a Michael's or something. So it was really cool. So that's what I've been up to. I just got back and I'm going to be going to work tonight. I'm on the night shift, so, back on the old work grind. But I'm definitely feeling refreshed, and it was great just having basically a week to spend with the family and all that. On the creative side, things have just been like slowing down. And it's funny because in my last video, which was a goals video for this year, I said, I want to do, this many paintings, finish my sketchbook, make this many videos and all this. And I am so behind on like everything. I always fall into this trap because I think what happens is I naturally start out the year kind of in recovery from the previous year. I was pretty much going full speed at the end of the year between these paintings that I'm working on in this video, and then also going to sketchbook club meetings, trying to keep a steady pace on my sketchbook. So by the time I got to this year, really what I wanted to do was take a break and kind of mellow out for a little while, and that's what I've been doing. I think I've done maybe 8 pages in my sketchbook this year, which isn't a lot. As far as like paintings go, I haven't done any. In fact, I still have my paint cups that are all dried and crusty that I haven't cleaned out from last year. So I have a little bit of catching up to do, and I'm not ruling out that I could really make some progress on my goals, but yeah, really I've just been trying to read. I have been making progress on that goal. So I've read 3 books thus far, and I'm still behind because I should, if I wanted to read 24 books, that's the goal that I set. I should be at like book number 6 by now, but I'd still be happy if I can maintain this pace that I've been doing so far. I get to these moments where I start wanting to do different things creatively, because I've always gone through phases. Like when I was younger in middle school and high school, I really was into writing a lot. Like I tried to write science fiction novels and stuff like that, and I'd always get like 3 chapters in and just give up on it. Then I went through a music phase and I bought a bass guitar, and I was in a band with my friends for a couple years. Then that led to eventually trying to make a video game. And then when I worked on that for 3 years and kind of stalled out on that, then I got into the art stuff. I always just hit a point where I'm like, is this what I still want to be doing? Especially since I've never been able to monetize my hobbies in the way that I'd like. And you just reach a point where you're like, well, if I'm not making any money off of this, maybe I should be trying something different. So that's kind of where I am now. I feel like I'm in a bit of a holding pattern right now. At the same time, I've been really just enjoying relaxing and not creating so much. You know, sometimes it's fun just to do regular things that I like to do. You know, it's like a lot of times I'll boot up a video game and start playing, and then like 10 minutes into it, I'm like, oh man, I'm wasting so much time. This is horrible. I could be doing X, Y, or Z. But yeah, I've been playing a lot of different games. I'd like to make a video on the games that I've been playing, because I've kind of taken a break from some of the bigger AAA games that take hundreds of hours, and I've been playing some smaller indie games, just little games you can jump into and kind of chill out. Really what I've been figuring out is that instead of trying to focus so much on one thing, I've really just been feeling the need to kind of diversify in terms of the kinds of content, at least on YouTube, that I'm putting out. It's like, if I want to make a video about a game I've been playing or whatever, I don't need to feel bad about that, like I'm locked into a certain kind of content, because I'm really not. I have like 48 subscribers. I can do whatever kind of video I want to do. It's not like everyone knows me as a art YouTuber or something. That's kind of what my channel's been leaning towards, is like sketchbook tours and time lapses and these kind of art themed vlogs. But I really like to just make videos about whatever I'm interested in at the time and not worry so much about fitting into a certain mold or whatever, or certain style of video. I've kind of discovered that the best results come from letting go of your idea of certain outcomes, certain expectations, and just really trying to create the things that want to come out and want to be created. The value comes from that process of grasping for the thing that seems just a little bit out of reach and a little bit too ambitious, too out of your league. So I'm kind of going to be recalibrating and trying to expand into new areas with my videos. I want the process of making videos to feel like any other medium of art that I make, where there's no constraints and I can really try to encompass all of the niche interests that I have. Basically, that's my new strategy, and I can't tell you for sure what kind of videos are going to be coming up, but I just want to try to get a little bit more experimental. And like, if I have a crazy idea that I'm excited about, just do it, instead of being like, oh, I have to wait, I have to build up to that or something, or I'm not ready to do that yet. So yeah, that's my plan kind of moving forward. Basically, all of these things have led me to try to shift my social media strategy. I actually did start an Instagram page, which is new for me. I started this last year. I think I've only posted like 9 times on it. But I'm a big fan of Instagram, and I use it almost exclusively to look at other artists. I just think for an artist, it's a very visual based social media site. You know, with YouTube, you can get a sense of a creator's style just from maybe their thumbnails without clicking on a video. But if you're an artist, you have all of your art just displayed like it's a little digital gallery. So yeah, if you want to check out my Instagram page, it's b.mace.art, and I'll be trying to post all my finished pieces on there and maybe some short process videos or sketchbook spreads and stuff like that. But anyway, enough rambling. Let's go ahead and get back to this painting process. So my goal with New Squiggle City wasn't anything extravagant or revolutionary. I really just wanted to recreate the original drawing on a larger scale and trying to make use of the textural paint techniques that I've been using a lot recently. My main concern throughout the making of this piece was trying to keep all the different colors from having bad interactions. Pretty early on, I realized that trying to perfectly match the colors to the original version wasn't going to be practical. So I just decided to try to harmonize the colors to each other as I went along, and overall I found that that approach worked out pretty well. One of the dominant features of the painting is this zigzag shape that forms a geometric mountain range pierced by rays of sunlight. For this shape, I wanted to achieve a certain level of precision and sharpness to the lines, and for that I would need a lot of tape. I've used tape a bit in the past, mostly in my sketchbooks, but never to this extent. And I ended up using almost a whole roll of tape for this piece, which is pretty crazy. The basic process was tape out the shape of the zigzag, apply clear matte medium to seal the borders, wait for the matte medium to dry,
apply the first layer of paint, wait for that to dry, apply the second layer of paint, wait for that to dry, and then, assuming you don't need a third layer of paint,
finally peel off the tape. So yeah, this part of the painting was pretty repetitive and boring, but seeing the result every time I pulled the tape off gave me that motivation to see this section through. Once the zigzag was done, I moved on to the clouds at the top of the painting. This blue-gray that I mixed is one of my new favorite colors. All it is ultramarine blue with a hint of black and white. It created a really nice grounding neutral tone against the brighter colors. I used a fine liner filled with the same color to add some outlines to the clouds, and used some more tape for the cloud that was floating behind the mountain. Once the clouds were done, I turned my attention back to the intricate details of the cityscape. This was the most enjoyable part of the piece, laying down all these unique shapes and colors. It was also my first time using modeling paste, which I used for these reddish-orange pillars. The paste worked well with the tape, which peeled off smoothly and left a very distinct edge. The paste itself is made with marble dust, so when it dries out, it really looks like there's these strips of stone on the canvas with all these little natural blemishes and cracks. Yeah, I think it turned out really well, and I love using these thick applications of mediums and gels and modeling paste because they seem to bring so much dimension to what is usually regarded as a 2D form of art. The next challenge was the planet at the top, which was partially obscured by a cloud. The easiest way to get the precise circle that I needed was to make a stencil out of tape, and this ended up being an important technique in all three of the paintings in this video. And I did have to go back and do a few touch-ups because the tape didn't align perfectly with the edges of the cloud, but that was no big deal. And for the rest of this, I'll just let the footage play since really the process is just me adhering to the reference of the original. For the sides of the canvas, I used the same bluish gray that I used for the clouds, and that was it. New Squiggle City was complete. I was pretty happy with the result. Even though the paintings that I submitted weren't accepted into the Best of Polk show, it was still a fun challenge to try to remake a painting on a tight deadline. This was the first year that they ever did the Best of Polk show, so hopefully they do it again this year and I can try to reapply with some new paintings that I do. But here's the only picture of the finished painting that I have. I would have loved to do, you know, a nice cinematic shot, but I ended up gifting this painting to some of my family this past Christmas. Now let's go ahead and take a break from the artwork for the introduction of the Billy Goat Book Club. All right, welcome to the Billy Goat Book Club. As I've been trying to read more and more lately, it seems like this is a perfect opportunity to have something else to discuss on my channel, another aspect of what I like to do aside from art and occasionally writing and music and video games. I think that's about it. So I've got this stack of books here. This is what I read in 2024, and it wasn't a strong year for reading by any stretch of the imagination. It was one of my worst. Actually, it was one of the best years I've had in like 5 or 6 years, while also being pathetic compared to what I used to read back in my school days. But anyway, we're going to start off with this book here, Avenue of Mysteries by John Irving. This one, it's 460 pages, so pretty good size. This book, it sits squarely in what I would call, you know, literary fiction or just fiction. You know, there's no supernatural elements. There's no, you know, it's not sci-fi or anything like that. So John Irving as an author, he's, in my opinion, one of the best, most consistent of these literary fiction authors that are alive today. I've read 4 or 5 of his books and they've all been really good. I mean, some of them I've liked more than others. One of his greatest strengths as a writer is that he writes really, really good characters. His writing's very clean, it's very smooth, very easy to read, and he always covers interesting themes and interesting topics in his books. This one kind of focuses more broadly on the idea of miracles, and how different people interpret things that happen in their lives. Like, you know, they have an atheist doctor character, and then they have people who are like devoutly religious, like they have a couple of priests and stuff like, and nuns. There's a lot of stuff about Catholicism in this book. But basically, just to give a quick overview, it's a story of a writer named Juan Diego who is flying on a plane to the Philippines, and he has a chance encounter with this mother and daughter who are also on the plane, and they happen to be like his biggest fans or whatever. And there's also like another story at the same time of him having these flashbacks to his childhood where he lived as a dump kid, which is just a kid that lives around a dump, and it takes place in Mexico. But this book, it just really had a very interesting story. The characters were great, and the ending was very surprising. Usually with literary fiction, the ending, I don't know, the endings never really grab me in a lot of these because they're just about characters, and it's like there's nothing especially when it's about like just relationships and stuff. It's like, what's the craziest thing that can happen? I don't know. But this book had a very surprising ending, and it also kind of really resonated. Like, once I got to the ending, I was like, oh, okay, now the whole book feels like it makes a little more sense, while at the same time being kind of mysterious, which I guess is what the book was all about. So I gave this book 4 stars. For me, that's a highly recommended book. And, I think most people, if you're a fiction reader, I think you could find something to enjoy with this one. So, book number 2 is The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. So, I was like on Instagram, I was like scrolling through some reels, I think, and I saw Robert Greene, who's the author, and he was like giving some type of advice about certain types of people, or it's like one of those videos you see a lot where it's just some dude and he's like, giving you a quick tip or whatever. But there was something about this guy, I watched the video and was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then I looked up who he was. He's written several of these types of books. Like, here's some of the books, right? The Laws of Human Nature, The 33 Strategies of War. So a lot of these are just kind of books of rules that you could use for different purposes. And this book is kind of a more of a history book to me than like an advice book, because there's no way you're gonna remember 48 laws of power. You might remember a few of them, but really it's just a book of historical stories that kind of tie into these various laws that Robert Greene's talking about. And so, there's a story about Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, where Tesla was really the more genius of the two of them, at least when it came to like science, but he had no skills in running a business. So Edison, that was like his forte, he was really good with the business side of things, and he was basically able to capitalize on the work that Tesla did and make all the money off of it, while Tesla was kind of forgotten and lost to history. So there's this law, number 7, that says get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit, which is kind of a shitty thing to do. But I mean, I guess if you're like a Machiavellian, power-hungry psychopath, occasionally you could use a method like that. Even the author says in the book, like, if you try to live your life following all these rules, you're going to be like the worst person to be around, because you're just going to be stabbing everybody in the back and like being a little schemer. So I gave this one 3 stars. I think it's a perfectly good read. It's well written. For a history book, it's not boring. I found myself pretty engaged throughout. But yeah, a solid read. The next book on this list is Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. This is a shorter book, and when I looked at it, it seemed, for one thing, it's a National Book Award winner, which it's kind of a strange thing with these awards. I just don't feel like they mean much because people's tastes in books are so specific. I will say that this book was beautifully written. It's a very kind of intimate story. It's all about this one poor family in rural Mississippi, and this is like, it takes place over the week that Hurricane Katrina hits. So they're just, they're a poor family. I don't think they even have a TV in the story. They have like a radio. Or no, maybe they do have a TV. I can't remember. I remember in the book they're like messing with the wire antennas trying to get the signal to come through. It's all about this girl that she's 15 years old, I think, and she ends up getting pregnant by this other kid that lives in the neighborhood. And so she's like starting to get a baby bump and there's a hurricane coming, and then her older brother has this little pit bull that he's trying to train into a, like, to put it into dog fights, like as a prize pit bull. So there's all these elements happening, and the tension of the story just builds and builds as they're hearing about this hurricane that's just growing and getting closer. Of course, the climax of the book is when the hurricane actually hits. Real good characters. Parts of it were very intense. Jesmyn Ward, she writes in a very, very direct, kind of grounded way. So very solid. I can understand why it got a National Book Award, but at the same time, it's really not my cup of tea as far as just the subject matter. And I always like a little weirdness in my stories. My favorite genres are like sci-fi, fantasy, really wild kind of speculative fiction, stuff like that. A lot of this grounded stuff, I'm just like, okay, there's some characters, they do some things. So this one, I did give it a 4 stars just because it's very short and it's really well written. But as far as the story, didn't really hit me that hard. Okay, then we have Trapline by Carl Hiazen and Bill Montalbano. This book reminded me a lot of like Clive Cussler. If you've ever read Clive Cussler, his most famous series is about this guy named Dirk Pitt, who he's like a scientist, sailor type guy, that he has this research boat that he goes around the world in and he solves mysteries. And it's a very kind of Indiana Jones type series. He's just, running into these cackling villains and getting into all these hijinks, and he has like a, comedic sidekick, and he's got this hot babe that he's always, running into, but she's like, "Why won't you settle down with me, Dirk?" And he's like, "I can't. I'm a scientist on this research vessel, and I've got to solve the mystery of these shipwrecks." Anyway, see, I just went off on a frickin' Clive Cussler tangent. This book, I've read maybe one book by Carl Hiazen before, and maybe not even that. I just know of him because his books have very distinctive looks. If you go to the bookstore, they're all like brightly colored, like neon colors with his name really big, and they're the kind of book you'd pick up at the airport. I feel like if you were going to get on a plane, and you could probably bust through it over the plane ride. They're like a beach read. This one, definitely like that. It's about this ship captain in Key West. So basically the captain, this guy named Breeze Albury, he gets hired by these drug lords to go smuggle some refugees into Key West. And it's this, very fast-paced kind of story where something goes wrong and then he's on the bad side of the drug lords and everything. There's some good characters in here. They're very kind of archetypal. You got the cold businessman, the sleazy drug kingpin guy. They're kind of characters you've seen before, but it was a pretty funny read, and it had some good plot twists along the way. So I gave this one 4 stars. And finally, we get to the last book. This is a heartbreaking work of staggering genius. And no, that's not just my, description of the book. That's the actual title. It's by Dave Eggers. This book was fantastic. And, I have a lot of books in my collection. I swear it's always the book that I just randomly decide to grab, and I'm like, okay, I guess I'll read this one, get it out of the way. And I'm like, holy shit, this was the craziest book I didn't even expect. But in this book, the author, this is more of like a memoir or an autobiography. Dave Eggers, he was like 21, and both of his parents die within like a 3 week span. His dad dies, then his mom dies. And so all of a sudden, he has to start taking care of his younger brother, who's like 12 years old or something like that. Maybe even younger, like 10 or something. But because his parents are dead, he's got to take responsibility. So he basically like adopts his brother, and he moves to San Francisco and starts trying to build a life. It's just that it's got this great dynamic of an older brother who shouldn't even be, who's, he had no intention of being like a father figure, and he's trying to figure his own life out and get a job and support him and his brother. And then the brother, all of a sudden, the younger brother finds himself in a position where he's got to like listen to his older brother who's telling him what to do. It's just like a really crazy story. And the fact that it's something that really happened, it's like, holy shit. It was really funny. There's like some great back and forth conversations between the brothers when, because you know how siblings are, they'll just argue over the dumbest shit. So it's like you just got these two, the dad who's the older brother, he's like, go to your room. He's like, dude, I'm not going to my room. Like, it's really, really funny, really moving. So this book is definitely a 5-star book. It's a must read to me. And obviously I have a lot of other 5-star books that I've read over the years. But with this new series, I'm going to try to rate every book that I read just to give you an idea what I think of it. It's not, these aren't really super specific scores. It's just my general feeling on each book. Anyway, so that's what I thought about those 5 books that I read. Hope you enjoyed the reviews. I've read 3 books already this year. So if I can keep up this pace, I'll definitely read more books than I read last year. Anyway, keep an eye out for the next episode of the Billy Goat Book Club, and let's go ahead and get back to the artwork. So after I got done with New Squiggle City, I realized I had all these paints left over, all this modeling paste, so I decided to do 2 more paintings, and I had these black canvases that were just sitting around. I didn't really know what to do with them, but I thought they would be a good size to use. I didn't want to do anything too big. So I started on the first one, and I had this idea for a pillar, another pillar using the modeling paste. So I started by sketching that out with a white colored pencil. The first thing I started working on was the sky. I wanted it to be like either a sunrise or a sunset. It wouldn't really be clear, but I wanted there to be that gradient of a bright blue in the corner and then stretching up into darkness. And the blue paint that I was using had a lot of gloss medium in it, so it took a lot of layers, going over it over and over again, slowly building up the opacity. And finally, I was able to get the look that I wanted. So after that, I started on the pillar itself, which required me to use some masking tape again to kind of block out the shape. And once I had the tape down, I started going over it with the modeling paste, and it just didn't look good to me. So I scraped a bunch of it off. That left kind of an interesting texture underneath where a lot of the canvas was showing, and you had the patchiness of the modeling paste. And then I ended up going around the edges with the orange paint that I had. So I went around the edges with the fine liner pen, and I made the little grooves going up the column. Wasn't too much to it. I didn't go too crazy with the detail. But once everything dried, I think it looked pretty good. So I realized I wanted to get the sky looking a lot darker at the top, like pretty much pitch black. I just figured that the easiest way to do that would be to just go over it with some pure black paint and kind of just carve out a little section just to give it kind of some abstract interest to that area. So after I finished that corner of the sky, I went to the bottom of the canvas and started doing the details of the vegetation and the mountains in the background. And for this, I was also using the green paints that I had used in New Squiggle City. So there wasn't any mixing required or really thinking too hard about it. It was just like, okay, I've got a light green and a dark green. And if an area was in the shadow, I'd use the darker green. If not, it'd be the brighter green. That was just the entire process pretty much. Rarely do I go like super rendered with my artwork because I really don't want to overwork anything. I don't want to overwork anything, and I don't want to commit to something like some crazy amount of detail that might just end up, you know, not having the result I'm looking for. So for me, I try to work it right up until the point where it looks like acceptable to me, or like I can live with it, you know. I don't want people to be looking at it and be like, wow, that was so lazy. I want at least to have it look like I was being intentional and really trying to put some level of care into things. So I was pretty happy with this painting, and I decided to call it The Pillar of Sarduun. And Sarduun is just kind of an imaginary continent on some alien planet somewhere that I just came up with. I posted this on my Instagram, and I kind of did like a little paragraph explaining what this pillar was and the creatures that created it and everything. So if you want to check it out on my Instagram, you'll be able to see this tiny little narrative element that I wrote with it. As I moved on to the next black canvas that I had, it was starting to become clear that these two paintings needed to go together, and I needed to find some way of integrating them into a seamless whole where you could look at the paintings side by side and be like, oh, okay, I see how these go together. So I got this idea of a centipede that was coming out of the water and moving onto land. Like the previous painting, the first part of the process was getting a basic sketch worked out. So I sketched out the shoreline, I sketched out the centipede, and those were the two main elements. So that was basically all that I worried about. Once again, I had to use tape to get the shape of the centipede because I didn't want to just start slathering on the modeling paste. You know, I wanted this to be a precise shape. This was another painting where I had to make use of masking tape. So I made a little line of tape. I drew the shape of the centipede on with a pencil, and then I sliced it out. So that would basically be my stencil for the centipede that I would use later. So the next step was doing all these little pebbles, and the pebbles would start out small at the bottom of the canvas and just get bigger and bigger as they moved up. First I started with a gray color, and I just did random shaped little pebbles. It was definitely the most time-consuming part of the piece, but I really liked the effect, and actually I think I might try to flesh it out and experiment with that more in some future paintings. But anyway, so I went through the pebble process with the gray. Then I went back, I did the same thing with this kind of peachy orange color. At some point when I had gotten the water section filled up, I decided to go ahead and do the water. I decided to use the same paint that I used for the sky in the previous painting and just do one quick layer, because obviously this is shallow water, so the transparency was something I was looking for. for the edge of the water where it ran into the shore, I just added some white lines with Posca, and basically that's kind of the detail that gives it that symmetry with the other painting. So I did all the pebbles, and then it was time to lay down the stencil for the actual centipede, which, oh my god, this was a pain in the ass to put on, because everything was sticking to each other. I would try to lay it on and it would, it'd be stuck on the wrong spot. But eventually I got the stencil on. I was able to put just a smooth layer of the modeling paste on, which is what I tried to do with the pillar. It didn't work out the way I liked. And then, I don't know what happened. I think I was trying to put some kind of details on the centipede's body, and it ended up looking like shit, so I had to add another layer of the modeling paste, this time without the stencil being there. So that was pretty stressful. And also it kind of ruined the smooth finish that I had gotten on the last application. So the whole surface looks a little bumpier than it did before. But overall, it didn't ruin it or anything. So after that dried, I decided to go in with the orange fine liner pen and do all the legs for the centipede. So I went up and down both sides, trying to match them, because each segment of a centipede is connected to a pair of its legs. So I had to have the same amount of legs on each side. And somewhere along the way, I started miscounting. So at one point, I just put a little severed stump on one side of the centipede to make it match with the other side, because I forgot to do a leg and there wasn't really any room to put a whole nother leg in there. I got the legs done, I put a few eyes on it, I put some little pinchers on its head, and then I put these scales running along its back, and that was pretty much it. The centipede was done. By the time I got to the shells that were at the top of the canvas, I really was done with the painting. I didn't want to put any more effort into it, and so I just did the most basic thing I could think of. I got some Posca markers, some pastel colored ones, and just kind of filled them all in. And with that, the painting was complete. I decided to call this one Sarduun Centipede. It's from the same planet as the other painting. Here's what they look like side by side. This was the first time I ever made two paintings to be specifically side by side, so I think it turned out pretty good. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the artwork, the discussions, and the book reviews, and I will see you in the next video. Later.